Welcome to episode 8 of the Beyond podcast, where we interview people who we find inspiring, who might inspire you too. Our special guest for today's episode is Kyle. Kyle is a recent graduate of the University of Southern California, where he majored in computer science and business administration. Welcome, Kyle. For those who don't know you, could you give like a quick rundown of like who you are and like some cool facts about yourself to get us started?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Kyle. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. My family was in the restaurant business, so I grew up like washing dishes and like helping out, doing errands for the restaurants. Went off to college, studied computer science, interned at Etsy with Ethan,
Let's
and
go.
now I'm working from home as a software engineer at Yelp.
That's awesome. Let's start from the beginning. I guess like what were some of like um some key parts like growing up in Vancouver and in the restaurant business that really shaped who you are as a person and was like some things that like stuck out to you um when you were a kid.
Yeah, so growing up in when my family was running small businesses. So before we had restaurants, we had cafes, and then we opened restaurants. Uh, I had to help out a lot, especially once I started becoming like a teenager. Had to help wash dishes or just do random errands. Is really, uh, I guess I feel really lucky because I got to be involved with my family's livelihood even when I was still like growing up, and it made me really like appreciate hard work, like the hard work that my parents and family did, and also just the hard work of everyday people working like retail or in food service. It's not an easy job. I'm not the best dishwasher, I'll say that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like that hard work ethic, I guess were there any specific incidents or experiences that like stuck out to you that really help you like really own in on that notion of like the importance of working hard during your experiences working in the restaurant?
Yeah, so I got asked to do like a wide variety of things like bus tables, wash dishes. Probably the most notable was like one summer I spent just like packaging bread, basically wrapping them individually or like in packs of six or like in dozens. It was like very monotonous, like repetitive, do the same thing over and over. But it really taught me a great lesson how like even though I'm doing such a simple task, like it didn't mean that I was good at it. In fact, like I was like pretty bad and really slow relative to the other workers, even though I was, in like my opinion, like trying as hard as I could. Like it's just
Hmm.
like went to show me as a kid that just because something seems easy doesn't mean that you can coast. Like it's it's like way I mean like it's really important to take like pride in your work even if you're doing a really simple task, because like for me, like me kind of like being slow on that meant that I was in the shop for like hours more than I should have been.
Mm, gotcha. And for that like realization to occur, did that occur like later on, like when you were in college, or like were you really mature as a kid and you're like, wow, like this will serve me this will serve me well like long term. Like as a kid, what was your mindset going into like working in a restaurant and stuff like that? How did you, I guess, feel when you were a kid, and then subsequently when you like went back to school? Was that like a huge part of your identity at the time? um I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really make it a big part of my identity, but I definitely like I think it helped make me see the world a different way like when I was
Hmm.
younger, because so like when I was a kid and then went to like family cafes or restaurants, like I just had a nice happy time. Like I just go there, like the staff would like serve me some like food and like drinks, like I would just chill. But then and I thought it was just like an easy, like nice happy place. But when I got like older and had to like start working in them, I realized there's actually like a lot of hard work that goes into this. And this is just like, like our like small restaurant, like let alone like and it was just like running a small restaurant, like not even um doing something like really like grand, like like
Hmm.
finding a cure to COVID or like
Right.
doing like healthcare work or uh anything like that. So like growing up knowing that like even even just like surviving, like running a restaurant is like a lot of work, and it made me appreciate it
Mm,
and try and treat people working retail or anywhere else like as nicely as I could.
mm. Yeah, that's something that's is like really, I think, important to, I guess, realize is like how difficult it is to run like a small business. And it seems like you experienced that like firsthand. Um, and I guess like having that appreciation early on, um, did that serve like a factor at all, like when you like were like finding jobs like later on in life, or like when you were like finding companies to intern at, or like roles to take on at college? Like what how did the experience at like restaurants, seeing all that like hard work and understanding that like running a small business takes like a whole team and all these different like working parts, how did those experiences like shaped, I guess, how you moved on when you like went to college and like pursued other activities like in computer science or business?
Yeah, so I think that helped me a lot. So like for one, it taught me that no matter like how hard we worked or like how like good our like process was or our food was, it didn't like always translate to getting a bunch of customers. So
Hmm.
uh like when we make this analogy towards finding opportunities at college and recruiting and so and in tech, like I definitely it taught me a lot of resilience. It taught me a lot of um just because I'm not getting the results I want doesn't mean that I'm doing the wrong thing. So
Mm,
it was really good to like help me detach that.
right. And I think that's a good point. Like I think a lot of college students are very result driven, and outcome driven, in a sense that like let's say you put in like X amount of hours and you put in a lot of work to like apply to a bunch of internships, right? And then you get rejected by like 90% of them. I think a lot of people get like really, bummed out by that and let that affect them early on, and myself included. I think that's important point to like focus on the process and understand, like even if you do good work, sometimes like the outcome will not be what you expect for like a variety of factors that are outside your control, whether it's like headcount or like other factors involved, like the economy, like now, like the COVID pandemic, right? It's much harder to get a job now than it was like a year ago. You mentioned like resiliency and like how like sometimes the results didn't line up with like all the good work you made, like specifically like, whether you like cook like really good food, for example. um how did you apply that in college? I think something that like sticks out to me is like, I guess, the recruitment process. That's the easiest thing to think of, like how the results sometimes don't line up with like all the hard work you put in. But yeah, for you, how did that apply in your college experience?
So definitely in college, I didn't have kind of like the rosy like experience I thought I would have going in. Like I hit a lot of bumps along the way. Times where like I personally like really messed up, times where just like stuff happened to me that I couldn't avoid and that like really dragged me down. Just like dealing with all those like roadblocks as they came up is really how that helped me the most.
Mm, gotcha. And for like those roadblocks, I guess, experiencing those in college, and you mentioned like, oh, like you originally had like a rosy picture of college. I think I had a similar mindset. Like going into college, I was like, oh, I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z, and those totally changed for like one reason or the other. Um, I guess like having those changes in college, how are you able to adjust to those road bumps or those changes in life, and what helped for you for like adjusting to these different changes, like some that were in your control or like out of your control?
Yeah, so I guess it really depends on like what it was. So for example, if it was in my control, like the first like big notable mess up that is really stuck with me is when I was in first year in my first semester actually, I got a research position like working like in a lab just like helping a PhD student do some really cool AI research. I got that
Mm.
from like smooth talking a professor, like all that. And I was really excited to start and really motivated. But what ended up happening was I straight up just got too overwhelmed with all the stuff that was going on in my life and in school. And I just ghosted them. Like I went to the lab a few times and then I just stopped going and they never heard from me. And
Mm.
it's like to this day, like I'm still like really ashamed about it. But what helped me like got over the hump in that case was like acknowledging how I messed up. I like eventually like I apologized to the lab, like the PhD student I was working with, uh made some changes in what I was doing to make sure I wouldn't get that overwhelmed in subsequent semesters. So like I just dropped like half the stuff I was doing and that really helped me a lot moving forward. And
Mm.
then yeah, I don't know. Like we could get into the other type, like the things that aren't in your control, but
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like just having like a whole methodology where you like acknowledge that like you made a mistake and then you like create an action plan to, fix those mistakes and like hold yourself accountable. Yeah, I thought that was just a good way to frame it in that experience. And I think a lot of colleges or college students um, have those same experiences. And a lot of students get into a rut where they don't acknowledge it's a problem and it becomes a pattern. And then it could lead to like burnout or even like worse issues. So yeah, I think that's something important to like speak about. But yeah, and like you were gonna talk about like the uncontrollable side of things, so we could like move on to that. But were there any like other parts of like the controllable side of things that you learned afterwards? Were there any other instances um where you learned a little bit more about like how to deal with like mistakes where you were in control?
I guess it's like that's like a really heavy question because I think like everyone makes mistakes that
Right.
they wish could have gone differently, stuff like that. I know it's good to live life without regrets, but it doesn't mean that like you shouldn't be acknowledging your mistakes. I think
Mm.
that's a really important tool that I like to use is like first of all, like don't be afraid of it. Just acknowledge that you're gonna mess up sometimes and that's totally
Mm.
okay as long as you follow like the next steps, which are like to first of all like fix the damage if you can, and then next is like prevent it from happening next time or see like what can you learn from this. Like I like to think I'm an optimist, like there's always a silver lining. um Sometimes it's hard to see, but I like truly believe like there really is, so trying to take that silver lining and make it into a positive in the end.
Mm. Gotcha. Um, yeah, that's a great way to frame it really positively. I think like some of the key experiences I learned in my life was when I made a mistake and like I fixed it. As like cliche as it sounds, like those were the experiences where I learned the most. Like whether it was like personal or like in work and professional environment, like those were the things that helped shape who I am and like made me become like a better person and grow throughout my life. Um, Let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, like the flip side of things, I guess, like where like things are like uncontrollable, whether it's like now like in a pandemic, right, where everyone's in, where like now we're working in a remote environment. That's like an example of something that's uncontrollable, right? I guess how do you deal with those, roadblocks that are frustrating as well? But it's a little bit different in the sense that you're not the one who like made the mistake, right? It's something outside of your control, whether it's like the pandemic, for example, or like someone else or whatever. I guess in your experience, how have you dealt with those situations?
uh yeah, so especially it's something really big like the pandemic, like honestly I don't think there's like a really a great way to deal with it. It's all about putting things in perspective. So uh yeah, so like I know like you know this about me already, but when like in my second year of college, like my mom passed away of cancer. It was like pretty sudden, and I didn't take off time off school or anything. I just kept like chugging along, and obviously like my grades suffered. I like it was a really hard time for me. Like I was like mostly like shut in. I didn't spend that much time with friends, but they kept reaching out to me to try anyway. But um like in that case, like I cannot really give myself any advice other than like I just had to like process that and take time and adapt. And just like the pandemic right now, I've had to make this adjustment. And like the key thing is just like take your time with it and stay positive, because like really you need to understand that any like a lot of your failures are like not really because of like they don't really have anything to do with you as a person or your character or your like drive or perseverance. It's more just like something that happens in life, and you need to find a way to learn from it and adapt and just like keep chugging along.
Gotcha. And like, um, where you mentioned like taking your time, I think that's really great. Like, I think sometimes people just like move on with their lives and try to like forget things for like things that are like super tragic, especially in your circumstance. And like, sorry to hear about your loss again, but yeah, I think like one thing we talked about was like something that was helpful for those types of situation was just like talking to people. And like I guess for you, how did you mentioned like your friends were there for you, like how did taking your time like help you in that situation, I guess?
Yeah, so I guess like it really depends on your experience, but for me, like we were saying, like prior to that, like I was a pretty like like a go-getter. Like I really over like to take things onto my plate, take responsibilities, an opportunity, uh even to the point of me being overwhelmed. So when that happened to me, I think like it was actually like a good lesson for me to learn, because me slowing down and taking things slow after that happened, like it like I don't regret it at all. Like I'm happy I did that. It really helped ground me, put things in perspective again, and take me back to like thinking again of like what I actually find important rather than just trying to do everything.
Yeah, I think that's really important, like how to stay grounded. um what were those like key aspects that help um keep you grounded? You mentioned like slowing down, in terms of like taking all more roles and responsibilities. But like what else like helped stay kept you grounded during that time?
So again, like my I was very lucky that a lot of my friends, like they just kept reaching out to me, asking me to hang out, like just as if nothing happened. Like I didn't really make it that public, so I'm sure like a lot of them didn't know, or like a lot of them did know and they just wanted to reach out and just like be nice to me, you know? So uh definitely just spending time with other people. Like I didn't need to like iterate my problems through them and get like a therapy session from my friends, but just like being with them and having like spending quality time really helped out a lot. In some cases, it was even like me reaching out to other people. Just that didn't happen that nearly as often, honestly, but I felt that as also can help keep me grounded and remind myself about like what I value, which is in the end is like friendships and connection and all that nice stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think during the pandemic, especially, it's been like very prevalent is like the sense of like feeling apart because like you're not on, like at least in my situation, like where I'm in college, is like you're not with your friends on campus. You can't like grab food or whatever, and it's like harder to hang out with people. So what I appreciate from like some of my friends is like when they reach out to me or like it's spontaneous and they just like check in on me. And now I've tried to do vice versa, is like checking in with people too. I think that's just like really important for like staying grounded in like those situations where it's difficult because you never know like what someone is going through, oftentimes, and just like reaching out, treating people nicely, as you mentioned, is something like really important. Um, I guess like building on that point for, I guess, um, how like you like maintain those like strong relationships with your friends and how you like lean on your support system. I guess what are your tips for, I guess, college students and like also new grads for forming support systems from scratch, in the sense that like when I went to like Berkeley, I didn't really know anyone in Berkeley, to be honest. And now that I'm going graduating from Berkeley, I don't really know anyone in SF. So I'm curious, like, what are your tips for like developing like a strong support system to like lean on when you're just starting out in a new area or like a new journey?
Yeah, so like honestly, like I've had to do this a couple times, like when I first moved for college, and then also like when like I moved for like internships and like I met Ethan. But honestly, there's not really a great way, like, like advice still here is like just like get yourself out there and try and find people with common interest. And that's honestly like I think that's all you can do. And
Mhm.
it might take a really long time, especially during the pandemic. You might have to wait until, I don't know, like I'm not
Yeah,
really sure how to do it online right now, but
right.
it's it's really just about being comfortable enough with yourself
Mhm.
that you can start to like share yourself and your like personality with other people. And
Yeah.
chances are, if you're a decent enough person, then other people think you're chill too, so
Yeah. I think that's like a really great point about like just being comfortable with who you are. I remember at Etsy, like when we first like were in orientation or whatever, like when we were in a room and then we were gonna get sent off to lunch with our like mentor for our team. I remember sitting in the room and I was so nervous and I put on like a huge mask. I didn't really like act like myself, and I was just like very stoic. I was like really nervous the whole time. But like the days afterwards, I thought it was much better, like just you know lowering my guard a little bit and just like being myself or like whatever was really helpful. I think it wasn't until like 2 weeks in that I start mentioned basketball, and then like we started playing basketball. That was really fun. Then I was like,
Mhm.
good point, like common interests. um so yeah, that was a cool experience. I don't know, like in Etsy, it was a really interesting case. I felt like I was friends with like most, if not all, the interns, and I always wonder why that is the case. And like I always look at like freshman year, like where like at least for me, you're in the same dorm, and then a lot of your friends come from the dorm or like your orientation session. Uh I guess what was your take like on Etsy, I guess, is what I'm curious about. Like why do you think like everyone in our group was like, I don't know, we were like cool friends, and I think like we got along with each other pretty quickly. I'm always curious like why that was the case. Do you have any
um
ideas?
I don't know, like I guess for the most part people were like all really chill. Like I know like in our recruiting process, like Etsy put a lot of value in like culture fit and like the behavioral side. Always find it weird when
True.
people say behavioral, but like you know what I'm getting at. Like they
Yeah,
really like they value
the
in their
vibe check.
engineers. Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah,
vibe check. They want engineers who are like who like vibe with everyone else. So like that was like a big part of it. And also it was not that big of a group. So
that's true.
also I think it being
Size.
a pretty small group was a really big thing. Like it was just like group of 20 something, like 20 something year olds, like just
Yeah.
like all of them, like most of us in New York for like the first time. And there's a lot of stuff to do in that city.
Yeah, I think that was a huge part. Was like most of us, like it was our first experience in living in New York and like doing all these cool things. So like everyone was like super down to do like whatever, like whether it was like what do we do? Like going to late night or whatever, or just like exploring the city in general. I thought it was like really awesome. Um and yeah, now that we're gonna like I'm starting my job in like June, and like everyone's saying like, oh, SF is like dead. And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to like replicate the same experience in New York where like you can explore like a bunch of places, and that's what I'm worried about. But yeah, we'll see. I guess like what's your take on how life is gonna change post pandemic? you've been working
Mhm.
remotely for the past few months, and like I guess currently now, what is your take, you think? Do you have any predictions on how life will be post pandemic?
Like honestly, like I think anyone's prediction is like most of them are gonna end up totally wrong. But I know like it's kind of been trending right now that people are moving out of big cities,
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
especially like cities like SF or New York, that like places that where people would move to for jobs. And these are
Right.
typically like white collar jobs, like pretty well paying, like the
Right.
exact type of job that can easily shift to remote, like with the right technology. So
Yeah.
like one of like my like big predictions is like if I feel like stuff like WeWork and maybe not specifically that company, but like shared office spaces is gonna start to become a lot bigger of a thing, because there's
Mhm.
gonna be a lot of people who um are now in a distributed workforce, but they still want to go to an office. So
Yeah.
for me, like maybe like I'm living in Vancouver right now. I'm working for a company in SF, but say like I don't want to move to SF, but I want to work in an office and I like my job, then what am I gonna do?
Right. Yeah.
So I yeah, I'm not sure how good of a take this will hold up, but I
No,
kind of see
that's
a
a good
comeback
take.
of those companies, because I know like right before the pandemic, they weren't exactly in the best spot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like how people are moving out of these big cities to live in, I guess, lower cost locations. Like SF and New York are really expensive to live in. I remember looking at apartment prices and I was like, what the so high. But yeah, we'll see. And I guess like that's a good point about like remote work. I guess like recruiting in a remote environment. It was my first time recruiting like all via Zoom, and I kind of want to talk a little bit more about um, your experiences recruiting. Like for me, recruiting remote was like very difficult. Like you can't really whiteboard
Yeah.
on Zoom, so you have to like explain with your hands or like through words or like through a Google Doc, and it was so hard. But I guess for you, what was like your experience recruiting over the past 4 years? Like you're a software engineer now, but I'm sure you had like a lot of experiences in recruiting.
Mhm. Um, yeah, so I think now being remote is honestly not the most massive difference, because like
Hmm.
previously, like most of the recruiting process would be remote anyway, except for like the final round,
That's true. Yeah.
right? So it's yeah, so I think like specifically because of the pandemic, it probably hasn't changed that much, but I think the in-person aspect is like,
Mhm.
it is like that might be missed out on, because I feel like when I go to a place and I give an interview, like with like the real like people I'd be working with face to face, it really just it makes it feel so much more important.
Right.
Like wow, like I'm doing like real like work, like there's like millions of dollars being poured into this business, like
Right.
like it's like an extra sense of like pressure, and like and also like it's kind of like inspiring. Like I'm not
Mm.
sure if I'd have the same feelings if I got a job where like I recruited completely remotely and I never like got to see anyone face to face. It's just like not that it would mean the company is like any less important. It's just like how do you consolidate that into your brain,
Mm.
like that this job I just applied for online is now like they want to pay me this much money to like do this type of work. It kind of feels a bit weird.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I remember like I've only had like one on wait, I had a few on sites, and like I always liked going into on sites because one, they would always pay for everything for travels and hotels. And the second point was like you get to see how people work in real action, and then you can read their body language, and it's really dynamic, the conversations you have, and like the whiteboarding, and just like one company, they would ask me like system design question, you would always just like draw the diagrams out, and I thought it was really fun. And like for Etsy, like just drawing out and working through these problems with an engineer was always fun. Um, and yeah, those are the people you're going to work with. And I remember the person who interviewed me at Etsy, we worked together over the summer, and we always like we always laughed about like talk when we talked about the interview, but I thought I failed that interview. But he said like, you really stood out the way that you struggled and overcame those struggles. And I was like, I don't think I would have passed the interview if I did it remotely, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, so that's something I'm like a little bit sad about for people who are recruiting this year and the past year or so, is like some people will definitely not, be as successful as they were like in person. Um, but I guess like what are your tips in general for recruiting? Like you're now like a software engineer at Yelp, which is huge, right? Super excited for you and super happy for you. Like how are you able to land, such an incredible like software engineering position at that company? And like what tips would you have for people who want to work at like Yelp or similar companies that have a huge impact on people and small businesses?
Um, yeah, so definitely like I'm not some recruiting guru. Like I'm not like I haven't been like flooded with interviews, job offers, things like that. I am like I'd say I'm more I fit more into the category of those people who are like you just get lucky a few times. And I feel like that's what happened to me. Like I've only gotten a handful of job offers. Like yeah, sometimes like I just had to get lucky. And that doesn't mean that you can't do anything because the thing is like luck favors the prepared, right? So
Mm,
like even though it's lucky in the sense that like there's nothing you can do to like guarantee getting a job, but
right.
you can like you can get your name out there. You can apply to a bunch of companies, make sure your resume looks really good, and you can be persistent. uh I think the number one tip I'd have is like really just like be yourself, because when you're recruiting, uh I guess there are a lot of cases like okay, so I guess in some respects when you're recruiting, a company is looking to find someone to do a job, right? They're looking for a
Hmm.
skill set, stuff that you could do, but what they're more looking at is they're looking for a person to fill the job, because just because you have these skills and
Hmm.
you've done all this fancy stuff doesn't mean that once you get hired you'll keep doing this awesome work for the company in the future, right? So the company in the end, even though it's people really like to like brag about like hard stats, like oh I'm this good at doing leak code, or like I have an app with like a million downloads, like really like
Mm,
I know like this, if you look at like think about the psychology of the companies, like just because they know that just because you have these accomplishments doesn't mean that you'll continue them. So they want some
mm,
proof that you are who you say you are. So really just like being your authentic self is
right.
the most important, I think. And like on top of that, if you really like focus on being yourself and not putting up like a farce, like it means like in the interviews, at least for me, it helps me be a lot more comfortable. I don't
Yeah.
need to put pressure on giving a performance. I just need to like be me and just be present.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Just being yourself and, not having to like put like on like a mask or anything. I think like one thing I've learned is that it's okay to like not know something during an interview. Well, like obviously you should know like your data structures, right? So it'd be bad like if you don't know like
Hmm.
a linked list, for example, that would probably be a red flag. But it's like okay if like you struggle, and that's something I learned the hard way. I remember like my first interview, I would like kind of like fake it, like say like, oh, I do know it, and kind of like just like BS my way through it. And I got rejected from like that company, right? So it's always good to just like slow down and take some time to think about your answers and just like, it's okay to struggle and like just walk through the different approaches you would take to, tackle it. And if you don't get the right answer, that's fine too. It's not the end of the world. They care more about your process, I think, for most
Hmm.
companies. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Also about like being persistent, um, as well for recruitment process. It's hard to, I guess like go through the whole process with like all like applying to a lot of companies and getting rejected by a lot of companies, but it's important to, keep on going and, put yourself out there. Um, but yeah, like I guess after you get the job, right? Like you intern at a few companies and now you're like a software engineer. Like I guess how do you translate the skills you showed in an interview in a workplace, or is it like totally different in your experience, like the skills that you're currently using? Like what are the most important skills you use at a workplace now as a software engineer?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of interview skills are really relevant, like the problem solving, uh, just tackling stuff from different angles and making sure that you've covered all the bases. That's still like really important, but you're not like on a time box. Like it's not like you have to code this thing in 20 minutes. Like that's like ridiculous at work, you know? So,
Mhm.
but what does translate is like those core problem solving skills. But then I think like really what's the two most important parts that aren't really tested as much in interviews is like number one, communication, which
Mhm.
yes, like they test on it in interviews, but the type of communication is different. So like in an
Right.
interview, it's like it's not really back and forth. It's more like just you're like you
Just
can
like,
have
yeah.
some back and forth with an interview, but really it's mostly going to be uh driven by you. But
Right.
when you're working, a big part of communication would be the listening part, right? So
Mm.
um like in interviews it's not as important. Like you just need to, listen, make sure you get stuff right. But in the actual work environment, if you listen, like you'll pick up on stuff that maybe like people forgot about, or maybe that is important tackles, but yeah, no one thought about. So that's really important. And then also like number two is research and learning skills. So
Mm.
uh this is, I guess, in the middle of the interview, you can't get tested on this. And this is like kind of a shame, really, because a lot of the job is like learning how to filter through vast amounts of information like really quickly. And just like if I see like on my screen, like there's like 1,000 words and it's just some like, but only like five of them are relevant, like that's a skill that you get trained like when you're actually doing work as a software engineer that you can't really replicate before that, I think.
Yeah, I think those are two really great important skills that are really understated in the recruitment process, or like I guess in media. I don't know. I watched some YouTube videos when I was getting into software engineering about like what it was all about. But yeah, listening is so important, like in whatever role you are in. Like I took a business class in Berkeley, and they usually told us like as leaders, the most important aspect is to listen and quiet your inner voice so that you like listen from all the different shareholders or whatever so that you make the most informed decision. But like even as like an individual contributor as a software engineer, I think is even more important listening to your peers, so that you have a full picture of the problem you're tackling or getting full context or whatever. And I think that takes a lot of time, especially as like a fresh grad, and you have like all these new ideas and all these like you think you know a lot, right? um but yeah, like your second point was really interesting too about researching and like filtering information. I think that's like a huge part of like debugging or like tackling a problem. Like even when I was like in internships, I remember like I had to read a lot of documentation or existing like code, and like being able to synthesize information from a code base is really hard. And then also, I would also chat with like engineers who design that code, and that's like it ties in with your listening part too. It all like works together. Like listening is really important, and then researching is really important, and like putting those two together to get like a full picture of like the code base you're working with, for example, or the problem you're tackling. I thought it was really great. Um, I guess for like younger developers or people who are just starting out in software engineering, like I guess what advice would you give them now that you have had like quite a few experiences under your belt while you're in college, and now that you're a year in or so working as a full-time software engineer at a company like Yelp? Like, what do you think are the most important skills to cultivate um, when you're just starting out? And like, how do you, how do you do that? Like soft skills you mentioned, like how do you like, I guess, gain this like the knowledge for that? Like that seems like pretty pretty hard to develop.
Yeah, so I like honestly like I'm not that experienced, so I can't really give that much advice to people who are like starting out as new developers just like I am, but like I could like give advice to people who are like maybe like they just decided they want to become a software engineer and they want to get on that track. Like how can
Hmm.
you develop these skills? Like
Right.
definitely I think the number one like most important thing is to like just take initiative and find opportunities for yourself. And if you can't find any, then create them for yourself. Uh so I know like a lot of people say like the best way to learn is by doing, and that's absolutely true, especially
Hmm.
in a field like this where like say I want to become a heart surgeon. I can't just like practice doing a heart surgery. You know, even if I got some really elaborate props, like it would be
Hmm.
really hard to just to even get that set up for myself.
Right.
But as a software engineer, a lot of the stuff you'll be building, like you can do it for free, like right now, like on a 10-year-old laptop, and it'll be fine. Like
Yeah.
most things that you'd want to do. So really just like actually take initiative, get started. That's one thing that a lot of like younger people who are trying to get into this career, like they ask me for advice, and then I ask them like what they've like done or like what they started doing, and if the answer is like nothing, then like I guess like my like best advice would be to just start and see where it takes you, because like software development is really like there's just an infinite amount of resources and like ways you could take it. So just like even just getting started is like your best way to find a path, because everyone's path is going to look completely different.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's important to, try things and take initiative and like chart your own path, right? There's no one right path to becoming like a great software engineer. Um, yeah, like making those opportunities for yourselves is really important. I think like the way I learned software engineering the most was working on side projects. And like that's what a lot of my professors tell like students, as well as like what my friends tell me, is like side projects is like what really help you understand how to build software from scratch. Because like courses, like it's very like not cut and dry, but like very structured in how you like learn material, right? They give you like one goal and one objective, and then you like solve it in one way, right? While like when you're working on a side project, there's like all these different avenues you can take to that solution, and the objective could always change as well. So yeah, I think that was just a really great point. Um, I guess to like wrap it all up, do you have anything you'd like to, end off with? Any like piece of, advice you'd like to drop here to share with the audience? Anything you'd like to, you know, share with all these wonderful people listening?
The number one advice I give to someone is to really just put yourself first, and to really like be proactive about putting yourself first. So that doesn't mean to be selfish, to see yourself as the center of the world. That's like I think that's when it goes too far, but I think not enough people in this day and age are really uh like there's kind of a problem of sometimes being too like considerate and being and like trying to help others too much to the point where you let yourself suffer. So like I really like yeah, I think it's really like great if like everyone figures out what's important to them and make sure that they do it, and then think about helping others like second, because if you put yourself first and you make sure that you're healthy, then you're in so much of a better position to help others. So we can kind of get the best of both worlds.
Mm, yeah, I think that's a great point about like self-care, the importance of that, and especially um, like people like us. Like I think like both of us are very ambitious. Like with whatever we do, it's sometimes like we sometimes forget like the importance to take some time for yourself, and like you've said that throughout like our conversation, importance to take time for yourself, and like thank you for sharing that. Um, and yeah, just to like wrap everything up, do you have anything to, plug to our audience, I know you are, quite popular on the social media. Do you have anything you'd like to share? I know you're active on a few platforms. I don't know if you want to share any of them.
uh, yeah, I guess like I'm not that popular. I don't know what Ethan's talking about, but you can follow me on Instagram at Kyle Chua. Yeah, I don't have that much like planned, but if I end up doing anything interesting, like starting a podcast, you'll hear about it there. So go ahead and follow me.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then next, I want to plug the Beyond podcast and Ethan Chu. So like, comment, and subscribe if you are interested in tech or just the things we talk about here. Yeah, Ethan's done a really great job with this, so glad to be on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, this is the end of episode 8. Thank you, everyone. And as Kyle said, subscribe, and join us for the next episode. All right, take care, Kyle.